Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. The 25th Winter Olympics are now well underway in the Italian Alps. By the time the Games close, 2,800 athletes representing more than 90 Olympic committees will have competed across 116 events in 16 disciplines. And for the very first time, events are taking place at two host cities, Milan and Cortina, in a bid to make this a truly sustainable gathering. But with climate change at the very heart of the conversation around winter sports, what might the future Games look like? With me now is Kristoff Dubie, Olympic Games Executive Director at the International Olympic Committee. Great to have you on the agenda, Christophe. Now, look, these Games are taking place against a complicated geopolitical background. How do global tensions, like from trade to security concerns, shape the way the IOC plans and protects an event of this scale?
I think there are two dimensions in the question here. One is the general backdrop and how we prepare in a world that is, as you say, full of tensions. And this is, I would say, the duty of the hosts to adapt to whatever the conditions might be. And here I'm making reference to security in particular. And we saw it in France. We had spoken a lot about safety and security of all delegations. It's no different for the Winter Games. And what I can witness from where I sit is the international efforts to make the Games safe is quite staggering. And being in France or here in Italy, the collaboration between the organizers that run the operations, right, and those ensuring security runs really deep. And if you go around Milano and all the resorts, you really feel safe, and they are very present. Then there is the other dimension, which is the IOC standpoint. And I think if we go back to a few days ago, the opening ceremony and the message from the IOC president, if there is one great unifier, it's sport and the athletes. And I think that in times of tensions, when we can assemble the world, and that was the case, again, in Paris, where we have all national Olympic committees. Here, you made reference to 90 plus. It is a sign that sport is based on merit, simplicity of rules, and power of values. And every time we are on big stage, every 2 years when we have the Games, this is what we demonstrate. Sport assemble people, and that's what we need, isn't it?
Which brings me on to part of the core of the Winter Olympics campaign, it being about sustainability more than ever. Part of the reason why these events are spread out, it means fewer locations had to be built from scratch. I mean, how confident are you that Milano Cortina can really genuinely claim to be a sustainable Winter Olympics? After all, you're already saying that transport has become a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, but transport in terms of impact will never be greater than if you have to build everywhere. Right. And that was the big thing in our strategic roadmap to say, listen, even though it would be widespread, the fact that we're using existing capabilities, being a venue or the people, the expertise that we have in all these locations, that is the great benefit. Then anytime you have to travel, we have to travel as respectfully as we can. So we have a mix of cars that are skewed towards hybrid and electric cars, and everyone, including many of us, we have buses that would go to any location to avoid individual cars. We're using trains quite a lot, public transportation in Milano. So we're trying to minimize the impact by using collective means rather than individuals.
But adaptation costs are rising. I'm thinking about things like snowmaking. Is the Winter Games becoming harder, do you think, for host cities to afford because of the trade-offs you mentioned?
First, you don't produce snow for Olympic Winter Games or for any sport competition, and you do not build specifically for these occasions. You build because the winter in many locations around the globe have become really short and uncertain. And snow production is to make sure that people that live in the mountains and live from the mountains have seasons where they can have skiers over a longer duration. And we have started in the Alps decades ago to produce snow. And yes, we're using quite a lot of it for the games, especially in some of the disciplines, but from systems that are not for the games, but again, for the greater good of the local communities. So there we have to be very clear. Now, is it more challenging in the future? Yes, absolutely. And I would say not only for winter, but for summer as well. If in winter we're speaking about cold and altitude, in summer we speak about the WBGT, which is the combination of heat and humidity. How many times did we discuss this for Tokyo and for Paris? Prior to Paris, what if we have a heat wave like in 23? We had plan Bs for virtually every sport outdoor. So it's not only winter, we are all impacted by climate change. For winter, more specifically, if you project yourself 30 years from now, what the studies we have commissioned, independent studies, demonstrate is that you have about 10 regions in the world that can host the games the way they are today. That is with skiing and ice. Higher altitude for sure. When it comes to the Alps, it will be probably over 2,000 meters. In other regions, especially China, where we were 4 years ago, still very stable in the future, but not everywhere, and not every host from the past can be hosting in the future. That is for sure.
Now, something that applies to both the winter and the summer games is the criticisms around the sponsors that you tie up with. And particularly for Milan and Cortina, one of the key sponsors is the Italian oil giant Eni. How do you match that up with your sustainability goals and ambitions?
We're all in transition, all. This industry and all the others, we're all impacted by sustainability and have to do the right thing. From technology to energy, transportation, airline industries. In sport we are an integrator of all of these, because you don't do sport events without all this support, right? But we have a duty when it comes to the IOC, and it's to push the agenda as far as we can. And on any of the indicators, I think it is expected from the institutions and from the games that we do the right thing. So this industry, like many others, is in transition, and what we have to do when we team up with them is to make sure that, for example, the HVO fuels, which will render all the generators more sustainable, is getting used, and that is the case. Every time we can use the grid rather than generator, we win. Every time we can move electric rather than with petrol fuel, we win. So that's what is expected, and that's what we all have to adapt to.
China has emerged as one of the most important markets for the Winter Olympics in terms of participation, but also in terms of viewership. How significant would you say that the Chinese audience is to the commercial success of these games?
Fundamental. China, first, very fond memories. I've had the opportunity to work twice, 2008 and 2022. And what a distinct pleasure it was to meet with the team that was here for a few days around the opening ceremony. Loved my experience in China all the way, every single day. Yes, it's an amazing market now for Winter Games. for winter sports, I would say, in the winter industry. You know, I've been to the winter industry gathering in Beijing a few times. It happens in December every year, and it's very, very impressive. And I could see the difference between when we started and what the status is today. And I think in terms of participation, it's not only the industry, but participation. We are at close to 400 million participants. So having China hosting events, the games or any other, developing an industry is fundamental for the winter sports in general. Not necessarily for the Olympic Games, but for winter sports. And we're really glad that we made that choice at the time.
I want to talk a little bit about the IOC's Fit for the Future initiative, where some people have suggested, you know what, we need to incorporate some of the summer disciplines into the future Winter Olympics. Tell us a little bit more about the thinking around that.
No, I cannot, and I will not, for a very specific reason. There is a working group. It is formed by anyone who should be part of that one, and I certainly will not preempt on any of the conclusions. But what I can tell you is that it is incredibly refreshing to have a process like Fit for the Future, because some of the things we are constrained for a very long time because it's in the charter, because it's in a contract or the rules. And the fact that the president takes a very open mind to all of these is fantastic, because it gives rise to many proposals. And all of these, I've seen the summary documentation of all proposals regarding the sport program, but in any other topic, and it's really wide-ranging. So won't comment on the specificities, but the fact that the door is open to these considerations is already a formidable step forward.
So far, the games are super exciting. You look at the big air, you look at the figure skating. But I do want to ask you one more thing about the constraints, because when you look beyond Milan and Cortina, what would you say the hardest decisions are that the IOC are going to have to make about the Winter Olympics in the next decade?
I cannot point to any specific item, but what I can say is relevance and importance of the games are two critical elements according to my point of view. Relevance is the content of what we show, okay? Will it evolve? Yes, of course. We'll have more disciplines, more events. Some might be away from the program. That's okay. That's the product and the way we show it with the imagery that you see now in these games, which I think is absolutely stunning. The way we consume the games, it will have to be at the forefront, because the expectations is for the games to be better, to our previous point. The importance is slightly different. Importance of the games for me is top athletes continue to want to be involved, and that's absolutely essential. But it's also the importance of the values, and I know it could sound cheesy, you know, values, respect, friendship. It matters, and I think the importance of the games is for the world every 2 years to assemble. And if you would have asked me 30 years ago what it meant, or if you ask me today, at the time I would have said yes, it's a lofty objective, and when I started at the IOC, now I think it's really the deep roots of this movement, and the power of sport is the power of its values, its simplicity, and what it brings to the world is this: we are all together around very simple rules, and that's the importance that we have to maintain and cannot compromise.
Kristoff Dubie, thank you very much.
Grazie tanto.
As we heard before the break, studies have shown that the number of places in the world fit to host the Winter Games in future are falling fast thanks to climate change. The co-author of one such study is Daniel Scott, Professor and Strategic Director for Climate Change Education in Environment at Canada's University of Waterloo. And he joins me now. Great to have you on the agenda. Now, your research looks at how climate change is reshaping winter sports. How serious is it, and what changes are you seeing, not just in the future, but now?
Thanks for having me, Juliet. So we did a report for the International Olympic Committee, and we looked at 93 different locations that they had indicated much of the winter sports infrastructure was already there. We looked at their ability to either produce a snowpack, use whatever Mother Nature gave them. And of those 93 locations, only 45 to 55 were still climate reliable by mid-century for the Olympics. What was a bit more concerning was the Paralympics, which happened in March, just a month later. That number was down between 17 and 31. So there's a much bigger climate risk that we have to address for the Paralympics.
Now, winter sports depend on a very narrow set of conditions. How much has that shrunk, that margin for error shrunk? And what does it mean for athletes as well as for the organisers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, for athletes, it's a major difference between fairness and even health and injury. One thing that we really noticed going from the Vancouver Games to the Sochi Games was the injury rate for Paralympians went up sixfold by the time they got to Sochi, and the athletes get better typically games over games. So it wasn't related to that; it was simply snow conditions. So what we've seen is, in general, there's a warming trend that many of the past host locations. But one thing that we see even more broadly, where most of the ski industry is located around the world, is the low elevation mountain areas. They've warmed at about double the rate of global warming. And that's really affected the snowpack, particularly early in the year, before you can make the snow. So typically, January, February, you've got enough cold that you can make the snow. So that makes that the perfect month for the ski industry, but also for the Winter Olympics. But those margins of errors, particularly at the beginning and the end of the season, are getting squeezed, as you said.
You're talking about snowmaking, often presented as a solution, but from a sustainability perspective, how effective is it really? Because there are trade-offs, aren't there?
Absolutely. And snowmaking has been part of the Winter Olympics for 40 years. It first appeared at Lake Placid in the 1980s. So it's been with us. Each location, needs to use it as much as Mother Nature gives its natural snow. They might need to use it a lot, and then we saw that in the Beijing Games in particular, where pretty much 100% of the snowpack used there was machine made, and we knew that going in because China, that's their dry season. So it had to be that. And there's fair questions to be asked in terms of the water use, in terms of the energy use. Does it create emissions that feed back into climate change? And it's really place specific and runs the gamut between very unsustainable to very sustainable. So just to give you an example, the next games, in France, their electricity grid is 100% nuclear, solar, wind. So there's almost no carbon footprint associated with that. The very next games in Salt Lake City, they still have coal in their grid. So any unit of snow that they have to make can be 16 to 20 times more carbon footprint than the French games. So very place specific, and it varies, within even the next games in some cases.
So from your research, you're talking about clear limits here, physical, also economical, environmental as well. I mean, who are going to be the winners? Who are going to be the losers?
Yeah, that's the great question. And it really partly depends on what kind of climate future we end up in. So some of the modeling we use a low emission future, which is consistent with achieving the Paris Climate Agreement. And that's where we maintain about half of our snow reliable locations from mid-century and even late century. But if we continue on sort of a high emission pathway, we're going to lose anywhere between sort of 3/4 and even more for the Paralympics. So it really changes the geography of the games. It changes the economics, as you said. Snowmaking comes with a cost, the infrastructure that has to go in it. And in terms of winners and losers, it really varies by continent. So in a European context, for example, high elevation, Austria, Italy, the French games, which are next, and Switzerland, those are the locations that will still be climate reliable. In Asia, we've got Japan. Beijing games, again, very cold reliable, so they could host it again. And in North America, it's really in the Rocky Mountains. So Calgary and Salt Lake City that are past hosts remain climate reliable as well.
Now, critics will argue that adapting to climate change is becoming increasingly expensive, perhaps prohibitively expensive. I mean, at what point do you think adaptation really does stop making sense from a business point of view, putting Winter Olympics in peril?
Yeah, so there's absolutely limits, climate limits in terms of snowmaking, and then we've seen those crossed in Vancouver, for example, in 2010, which is what got us into looking at these questions. They had a good snowpack in North Vancouver. El Nino showed up, rained on it. It was too warm to make snow, so they ended up putting hay bales down and helicoptering in snow from other valleys. So there are physical limits. The economics. The Winter Olympics is blessed in some ways because the bid nations and the countries typically put enough resources in that they can afford the kind of snowmaking. Where we run up into real problems is often with the professional races, the FIS races around the world. Sometimes they don't have the snowmaking, or they're trying to host those competitions really early or late in the season. And so those boundaries of snowmaking are crossed at that point. And then we get into the sustainability question, as you raised, and that's really regionally dependent. But that's something the IOC really has to press the bid countries and cities to really focus on the sustainability of that snowmaking.
If organisers and governing bodies are going to take the science seriously, what would a genuinely climate resilient future for the Winter Olympic Games look like in a warming world?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in the IOCs, they've actually been a really good organization to look at. When we just looked at past hosts, they approached us and said, can you give us a presentation on that science? And we did. They asked some really good questions. And that's where they came back with us and said, can you look at this broader portfolio of locations of potential hosts? So that was good. They've been great to work with in that respect. They've now incorporated some of that research in terms of adding a criteria in terms of their selection for the next bid. Both the French Games and the Salt Lake City were considered climate reliable through mid-century based on our work. So they've been good to work with. They've also had a really positive reaction. We looked at one possible solution, particularly for the Paralympics, is how do you get it out of March? And so we looked at, well, if you move the Olympics forward by a few weeks, starting in mid-January, ending in February, early February, that would allow the Paralympics to shift up into the last week of February, finish up in early March. And that made a massive difference for the Paralympics. It almost doubled the number of climate reliable locations for them.
Daniel Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a great day.
Whilst winter sports like skiing and figure skating get regular coverage in global media, there are others for whom the Olympics is a vital showcase every 4 years. So just how is the changing nature of the Winter Games impacting them? With me now is the President of World Curling, Beau Welling. Great to have you on the agenda. So just how important is the Winter Olympics for your sport?
Well, I mean, the Winter Olympics is huge for our sport. So we have 3 disciplines that we play here, mixed doubles, men's and women's. And we actually start 2 days before the opening ceremonies and play every day up until the closing ceremonies. So 19 days of curling, over 120 to 30 hours of television coverage. So it's a lot. So we're broadcasted, throughout the world. The numbers are in the billions of the people that watch curling, and that would be 10 to 15x what a normal world championship would be for us. And so that's a really massive amount of exposure, and it certainly helps drive growth down for our members, the different countries, and even down to the local clubs throughout the world.
And what are you doing in between Olympics to improve the visibility of curling?
Yeah, I mean, we have a all-inclusive sort of communications strategy. We have year-round broadcasts. We broadcast our own events. We have our own television production company, but we're increasingly trying to reach younger and younger audiences. And so we've got our own OTT platform. We've got our own podcast. We've got a very active social media presence and dynamic photography, videos, clips, content, stories. Like we're trying to let the world know about our unique sport and how special it is, how wonderful our athletes are. One of our missions is really to really grow our values around the world. And I'm personally a big believer that if the world had more curlers, the world would be a better place. And so we're working really hard to do that.
Well, while you're doing that, it is still quite niche in many regions. I mean, where do you see the greatest growth potential? Because I noticed that the Chinese competitors are moving up those world rankings pretty fast.
Yeah, there's no doubt we have grown a lot in Asia, and that remains a market that we're very, very excited about. Both China, as you mentioned, but also Korea and Japan. And even we're starting to even having clubs and members develop in Southeast Asia. And then I am from the United States, and the United States remains a huge growth market for us. A lot of the new facilities in curling that have happened in the United States, and facility development is a big constraint to us growing. And so we're working really hard to try to do that, as well as looking at how can we build more sustainable facilities as well.
I heard you mention that key buzzword, sustainability. It's become part of the Olympics vocabulary, and is especially key when it comes to winter sports. Well, what are you doing at World Curling to improve sustainability?
Well, I think we're leaning in is first and foremost, and we've formed a sustainability commission, which is chaired by one of our vice presidents, Kim Forge, and we've launched what we call the Ice Cubed 2034 environmental sustainability strategy. So we're very excited about that. We have joined the Sports for Climate Action framework, and we're working really hard on the decisions that we make to make sure that we're looking through those decisions through the lens of sustainability. So like where we take our events, how we construct facilities, really almost every decision that we're making, we now have a framework by which we look at sustainability and allow that to inform decisions that we make.
And what about being economically sustainable? How is curling faring in that regard?
Yeah, sure. It's a huge issue. One of our tenets of our organizational strategy, our forward plan, is what we call organizational sustainability, which means like survival. And I think economic sustainability is a huge part of that. We're looking to bring more and more revenue streams into the sport. We are very much aware that the traditional sports funding mechanisms, that world is being disruptive. And so we're very much looking at change and evolving to sort of modern sport. And so it's something that's super key to us. I think our participation in the Olympic movement is obviously very, very key, and it's a huge funding source, but we're increasingly developing other funding sources, and we will continue to do so. And we think that's a big part of our mission as governance here at World Curling is really to provide for that future economic sustainability.
Now, as we heard from Kristoff Dubie, who we spoke to earlier in the programme, this Fit for the Future initiative of the IOC is looking into the possibility of incorporating maybe some summer disciplines into the Winter Olympics in the future. What's your take on that?
Yeah, we're pretty resolute in our opinion that we believe that the Winter Olympics should remain sports in snow and ice, which is consistent with the Olympic Charter. World Curling is a part of so-called WOLF, which stands for Winter Olympic Federations, and so there's 7 of us, and the 7 of us all believe and support the Fit for Future ideas that our president is looking into, and we're excited about that. We're excited about innovation and adapting the program for the future, but we think that the Winter Olympics really needs to maintain its unique identity, which relies on snow and ice, and so we want to participate and help evolve, but we want to do that through the lens of snow and ice.
Beau Welling, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are 2 ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project,
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.